This is a conversation with the Italian photographer Davide Degano. We talked about two of his projects, namely Romanzo Meticcio and Sclavanie, in which David explores questions from the margin, the so-called margin, the people that are left behind or simply forgotten and silenced from the main narrative. So David finds it important and necessary to bring those counter voices to the awareness of society. Well, so do I. And we talked about that in the context of his projects and in the context of the colonial past of Italy. And we talked also about the potential narrative of the photobook, and we exchanged some ideas related to that. Unfortunately, you will not be able to see my face during the interview due to the malfunction on the automatic alternation between speakers on Zoom, the platform that I use for this interview. Well, you can thank me later if you want. Instead, you will be stuck with the face of David, and delighted for sure with his awesome photographs that he so generously shared with us. So, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Davide Degano. Hi, David, and welcome. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation for the interview.
Hi, Jorge, and thank you so much for inviting me. Happy to be here.
So I have a bunch of questions for you, and we will, during our conversation, we will talk about some of your projects and what you have in hands. But I will, just for as a warm up, I would like you to tell us what it takes to be a photographer these days. So if you can, for example, give us a preview what a typical week would be for you. What keeps you busy, David?
Oh, that's I don't know what it takes. I think it takes a lot of passion, probably, because it's not a conventional probably career, especially when it comes photography, like within the fine art world. But I think also when you do commercial and let's say photography in its kind of overall possibilities is a bit unconventional, because you don't really, even though now you have university courses, and so you can go to university, do indeed a master, PhD, become academic and everything. It doesn't have a career development that can be kind of, I think, organized step by step as it could be other type of career when it comes of, I don't know, studying medicine or perhaps law, or where it doesn't necessarily mean that is enough to study to become a doctor, but you have certain steps that are, let's say, a bit more predictable than working as an artist, because it can happen to you before graduating, while graduating, after graduating, after you pass away most of the time. So I think it's just passion, a lot of passion, and the urge to discover, and the urge to be curious about what interests you. And as far as my week is concerned, it varies because this year, as we were briefly talking before, I've done a master in visual arts in Ghent. I was appointed a scholarship from the Flemish government, and I was blessed enough to be able to attend the master, focusing only on it for this entire year. At the same time, I'm doing the same in Italy, in Brera, in Milan. So I've been doing two master at the same time for two different reasons, but both because I want to carry on my academic career, and then in the future, hopefully in the near future, apply for a PhD where I can then combine my artistic practice with the academic practice. So my week, it would be like usually in the morning, I go to the studio and I do as much research as I possibly can. So I focus on, researching, reading, studying. And then you have the days in which I focus mostly on my photographic practice. So let's say if I photograph for a project, I have 1 or 2 days per week that I dedicate fully and entirely to go to the darkroom, develop contact sheets and analyze the images, and then perhaps scan with the Imacon the most interesting one, and then print them, and then start a bit of editing and thinking about what the images are saying, to then leave them a bit on the side and take some images I took some time ago to see if they resonate with me in the same way, if they are telling me something different, and then step by step going like backwards and forward to kind of understand if the project is kind of if the project is actually on the right direction or not. So let's say my week is divided into a part which is more research. The other one has been more practical, so developing and thinking about the outcome of my photography. And then perhaps twice per month for a week, so 2 weeks per month, I try to dedicate to my personal project when I'm lucky enough to win grants or win like prizes or receive money that allow me to focus a bit more on that and commission. And then sometimes I do commission works. I try to accept as many as possible because I do have fun. So easy. Of course, it is mostly for paying the bills and have the finances to carry on my artistic practice. But I'm not shy in saying that I do like to take pictures. So sometimes also being able to take picture and be paid for it, not having to think too much in terms of concept and ideas, but just bring my experience as an author is refreshing and also good, both for the finances, but also I think for my personal practice too.
So, in terms of what routine do you have in terms of the sessions themselves? So, the times you go out to photograph, they are
Well,
within those 2 weeks that you dedicate to the project?
yeah. Every month at least 2 weeks. Then it could be, I don't know. Recently, I spent the whole month in Italy working on my new work. So it varies really much. It can be 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months. It depends.
Mainly photographing, you mean?
Yeah, mainly photographing. Like when I go to photograph, I'm fully immersed in it, so I don't bring a laptop with me, or perhaps only my laptop for really emergencies. The same it goes with the email, with the phone. Like when I'm out there to photograph, is only about photographing, and my practice is really much based on also on portraiture. So is a lot of time that for me that I invest in getting to know people, getting to be trusted, and then perhaps take a picture of them coming back in the same spot. So creating a sort of relationship where that I try to kind of then show into my picture. So is those days are fully dedicated in creating, and without also thinking much about, which is then a bit of a contradiction, but I think also works pretty well, without thinking much about my research. So I'm really open. I mean, I try to kind of, my research tries to give me the necessary tool to be able to look outside in a different way, let's say, and to give me a sort of structure, but I'm really free and in navigate in breaking the structure that I built to have a direction. So I'm not really rigid when it comes of producing. So is the producing part and the photographic part is really intuitive. So even though I have I photograph now. Since I started my academic studies, I have to say my passion photography starts for street photography. Now I don't do it anymore. So every time I photograph, let's say with a purpose, meaning either I photograph from a personal project or because I'm asked to photograph something. So I lost a bit the playfulness of the medium, I think, which is a bit of a pity. I was talking about that with a friend of mine the other day, that perhaps is a bit of a pittiness when you invest so much in what is your hobby to become your profession, that sometimes you lose, and you still have a lot of passion for it. So it's not that when I go to photograph for my project or for a commission work, I count my blessing every single time. I'm the happiest person in the world. But
Do you feel split when you do one or the other?
no. I think that I started to learn and love the art world within the academy. But I was born as a photographer, meaning that I do like photographing. So for me, it's not, of course, in my personal project, I have another type of attitude. But it changes normally because like if you do a commercial work, generally speaking, you're photographing something, and the message that you convey is like convincing someone to buy a product. Whereas in my own photography, I don't want to convince nobody, and I don't, and it's not a photo. My photography and my work is not work where I try to say something. It's more I try to raise more question about a certain a given topic.
Well,
So that is a
that
different.
tension may be an important one, just to spend one minute or two on it, because sometimes I feel, I don't know if that is your experience, that people that are more close to the art, there is some kind of taboo, I suppose, to talk about the business of art, to talk about money, to sell our work. So you made your point in separating those two approaches, but even then, may I ask if you find useful that you have some experience on the commercial side of photography that you can use on presenting your outro work to the world?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm still fairly young, I think, but what I've learned is that you need to do compromises. I think that you need to do compromises because I started my academic studies in KBK in Den Haag in Holland. I had amazing teachers like Donald Webber, Adam Bloomberg, Oliver Chanarin, Rob Honstra, Hans van der Meer, Anna Lane Lewis. So huge, great artist. And they teach me really, and I enter into the academy really kind of radical in my ideologies. And so, but I soon kind of understood that it was too much of a contradiction and too much I was too much of a contradiction, and and uh, and learning how to I think a bit live ideology on the side and be more able to have a critical mind is what served the purpose for me, and is what it taught me to kind of also do compromises. So when it comes of selling your work and all this kind of stuff, I think it becomes a bit stinky when we keep, I mean, especially when I hear these big words, big way of behaving and teaching how to be a correct and untouchable human being when none of us is. And so like you kind of try to hide, your part in capitalism. But it becomes a bit ridiculous to do that when you are using a medium that it was born right at the beginning of the capitalism, that has been used to create segregation, that has been used to create subalternity, that has been used to trick people, that has been used marginalize people, that has been used also to brainwash people. And I'm referring to the propaganda where Italy, Portugal, Spain, and also the former Soviet Union countries were really good at in using images to create political propaganda and to attract consent. So taking into account all this information for me becomes a bit stinky to behave like the perfect anti-capitalist type of photography that wants to change the world and doesn't want to rely on the capital. But then we all go to Paris Photo, we all go to all these places. So I think it's better to position yourself really clearly without lazy games and be aware of the compromises you do, because then I think there is the difference. Because if you think not to be part of the capitalistic society while you're living in it is a bit naive. So if you know that you are part of it, but then how can you make the compromise between your ethics and the world you are working in? So that is what I think how I juggle between the two worlds, and how the commercial part of my practice influence my authorial part, because and then also the authorial part, they don't explain, in when you're studying it, but then when you finish, you are alone and you wonder, how am I getting money? That's what I was saying before, that is a less conventional trajectory in terms of career, because it's not that you finish and you perhaps go to teach in high school. Like my brother is doing a PhD in Lisbon in theoretical physics. And so he chose a career of research as well. So also he chose a career that is kind of unstable financially, because every 5 years you need to look for a new project, you need to apply for new grants, you need to do all this kind of stuff that artists do, as well. But for instance, in his case, after his kind of bachelor and master, he could work easily as a teacher in high school, teaching math and physics. There is a lack of it in Italy. So for him, it would have been a bit easier. This doesn't happen when it comes of photography, unless you do art history. But then in the case of Italy, you need to do some extra exams, because your degree is not specifically in art history. You need to kind of do research, create a sort of career that pushes and supports your academic career. So you need to create a certain kind of microcosm that is sufficient to be kind of reliable and be asked to do certain works in the academic field. And
well, I think even as an author, as a photographer, or an artist, one of the reasons perhaps that pulls you to that path is that you have something to say, that you have something to share with other people. And if you ignore the practical means of communication to a point that you isolate yourself from the world, that may not work. So you have to find a way to a platform of some shape to project your world for people to see it, and for you to be compensated and to live.
I totally agree. And again, I might also say something wrong, of course, because I'm young and I'm getting to know all this situation day by day. So it's not that I know something. I actually know nothing. But what I know is for sure that in art academy, they don't prepare you for this once you finish. And the reality of the thing and the truth is that you need to learn how to find the money, and which is like through grants, through prizes, because it's not enough to win a prize. It's not enough to win an award. That is good for financially, perhaps not even for a few months. In terms of recognition, is good for a small period, but then if you want to carry on an artistic practice throughout your life, you need to really be able to navigate the capitalistic society and being able to get something from it, because otherwise you won't be able to make work. It's as simple as that. Like if you don't have money, you cannot. If you're not, yeah, if you don't find the fundings for create a project, me personally, I talk about me, so I don't know about the others, but me personally, I won't be able to photograph in the way I do using medium format, large format, analog cameras. I won't be able to print. I won't be able to develop. I won't be able. So is really is important that you position yourself as a maker, and it's fundamental to position yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fundamental to position yourself in terms of themes and what you want to study with your practice, but it's also important that you position yourself as a practitioner within the society you are living in, because in that way you know how to compromise and how to look for the opportunities that are fitting with your persona. So you don't have to necessarily, I think, yeah, go to festivals or go to fairs or all this kind of stuff. But I think you need to know, you need to position yourself within your surroundings, and then from there you can choose, I think, what suits your personality the best, what suits your practice the best, but not taking into account the fact that you need to interact with the surrounding worlds and you need to find fundings for your practice to survive. It would be a bit too naive if you want to do it professionally, of course.
Yes, well said.
Yeah.
So you were explaining a bit of your weekend and your projects, your ambitions for the near future, and you talked about structure, that you pointed out that there is, perhaps comparing to another academic path, that there is a bit of lack of a structure to build a photographer career. But you also talked about both visual research and the research itself, that you spend a fair amount of time in your studio researching for your projects. So that is prompting me to comment in the following way. Don't you think that the photographer these days is kind of a blank canvas, in the sense that you may apply your art, your photography to any subject of your choice, but you are in these days expected to have an opinion, an informed opinion about so many topics, like political and social issues of contemporary social issues. And you have, I can imagine that this research that you do is that you feel informed in a deeper way about some of the issues that you dedicate your projects to. So if there is a question in this commentary, is if you agree that the photography has that pressure of being expected to have an informed opinion, and that photography itself is like a tool, like an embracing tool, like imagine, like philosophy. You can think about so many things, but the structure of thinking and the structure of seeing in photography are permeable enough to look at the world in so many ways. So I would ask you to comment and tell me what you think.
I think that I wish photography was yeah, my first studies were in philosophy in Italy before I left the country, and I wish the photography, it was seen like that, like a perfect tool to discuss and raise question about urgencies. So, and I use it in that way. Like, I think that photography is perfect for doing so. I think that photography is perfect for questioning rather than giving answer. And that's the reason why we should kind of all agree and move from the point that it shouldn't never be kind of photography related to the concept of reality and truthfulness, unless it's really much contextualized within a scientific realm. So for instance, if you're doing scientific research about flowers and you take the picture of certain flowers to document your research to the commissioner presented the research, of course, those pictures are depicting flowers, but they are really much into a specific context. But photography in itself is a medium that is fragmented and is not complete. And I think that this kind of incompleteness is the strength of photography that allows you to dive deeper in the zone in between, the gray zone that every story has. So that's, for instance, we are used now in how we are exposed to news and that there is like a really much a binary way of thinking. Either is wrong or right. The person who attacks, the person who gets attacked, the good and the evil. Whereas history has never been like that. History has always been a melting pot of contradiction. It's just enough to say that, for instance, history and identity are formed by individual memory. Individual memory, they come together as collective memory. But within collective memory, you have a lot of individual memory that are contrasty within the collective memory and within a society as well. Maybe I can give a better example later about in Romanzo Meticcio what I mean by that. But I think that learning to not understand is photography helps you in that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So for me, photography should be used not to give answer, but just to keep on questioning, keep on being critical, keep on try to understand, for instance, in my practice, how the events of the past and the decision taken in the past, how they have a sort of effect in today's society and how they will evolve in the future.
Maybe you can, for better understand your approach and the way you relate your research and your thinking and your photography, if you can perhaps give us an example of what you research about and how do you structure and how do you think about your research part of your project?
Yeah. For instance, in Romanzo Meticcio, which is a project that studies Italian, the concept of Italian identity and how Italian identity can be defined in the contemporary society, knowing that Italy is not aware of its own colonial past and knowing that identity has always been presented from states, especially when it comes of nationalism or totalitarianism, as a monolithic element, whereas identity is by its nature is fluid. It's enough to think about your own persona. You cannot say that your identity is the same as when you were 5 years old, because otherwise it would be there would be a problem within you if you're still the same as when you were 5. And so the work wants to kind of contextualize also my family upbringing. I was born in Sicily, so in the south, grew up in the north. My grandmother on my mom's side, she's Colombian, so I have double nationality, and my grandmother on my father's side, she's Slovenian. So I have this melting pot of culture and physical appearances in my family, and I wanted to contextualize that in the current Italian political situation in a country that doesn't know to be multicultural and seems to have forgotten its multicultural past, but also its multicultural roots, being a country in the middle of Mediterranean. So to talk about this, I've started to do to research from the unification up to these days and how images have been used to create certain margin and to create the idea of what is pure Italian and what is not. And of course, I got from the first colonial missions up to the fascism, without focusing only on fascism, because then fascism becomes a sort of an umbrella in Italy when it comes of and kind of a past that hasn't been resolved yet. But the colonial campaign that Italy started after its unification doesn't come from fascism, it comes from socialism. from that type of political movement where fascism comes from. And so studying all these things and how they've been using images, because they've been really kind of aware of the power of images. So how to kind of convey all this research through images and how to organize it. Because, for instance, Romanzo Meticcio talk about margins. And in the margins, you have the second, third, fourth generation of Italian, the people from the South, the cultural minorities, linguistic minorities. So how can I put all this in a coherent and understandable project? And my research in that case helps me in that. For instance, studying really much and having as a inspiration the writings of bell hooks, in particular on the margins, helped me to see the margins in a different way. I come from the margins too, and I always see them as a point of departure to go toward the center, where to have my dreams to be realized. Bell hooks teaches me that the margins are actually a place where cultural revival can be born, and new culture, new way of seeing, and counter narratives can come from the margins. So it's not a place of departure, but it's a place of resilience and a place where counter narratives must come. At the same time, for instance, the intersectionality theory of Afro-American feminists of the 70s, they invented it, developed it, helped me a lot in structuring the work when it came of editing and making the photo book, because it was the doubt, like my doubt was, how can I put together archival material, fascism, imperialism, Lombroso, my own photography, the portraits, the landscape, my family archive, text, and second generation, third generation, personal elements. So, and like when I studied intersectionality theory, that says basically, I'm really putting in simple words, that all they say that basically that to understand margins and to understand like the social disparities, you need to take into account at the same time all marginalized group. You cannot talk about them in as a singular entities, but you need to think them in their coexistence and overlapping in society. So you cannot talk about like Italian issues with the margins only through the Sicilians, only through the third generation, only through, because then you give hierarchies already within the margin. So you need to consider them in their coexistence. So these notions that I didn't have before, in some ways, I wouldn't be able to explain how, because I think is different person by person, but the click also how I was seeing my images and how I was seeing the world around me. So the knowledge itself helped me to kind of find the knowledge also in the visual I was producing. So
And also gives you the words to speak about it in a more clear vision, perhaps.
yeah.
So since we are talking about Romanzo Meticcio already, and the marginality and the identity representation, let's dive right into that project. So Romanzo Meticcio deals with the multicultural identity, suburban fragmentation, and intergenerational gaps. Do you see marginality as a political position, a cultural condition, perhaps, or a shifting perceptual frame?
Yeah, well, as I just said, like I'm really inspired by Bell Hooks' writings about marginality. So I really see as the margins as a place of cultural revival where counter narratives can finally find the light of the day. I think that the margins are fundamental to kind of questions the society we are living in, because most of the times what we learn, what is taught at school comes from the center. The margins sometimes they use the same story, but with a different ending and with a different plot. So is important to have different stories, because like different stories bring like they bring a sort of contrast, and they bring complexity. than only one story. If you only have one story, you are channeled toward one direction, and is fundamental in this time, I think, to have counter narratives, and counter narratives can come clearly from the margin. So I really think that the margin is a place where political revival and cultural revival can take place.
So I have some challenges thinking about these thematics, and I would love to hear you about that. For example, let me put it this way: doesn't the margin change when you point your camera to it? So if you make it the center, doesn't the margin, as by definition, I mean, it changes already to a certain degree? So the margin, when you consider the margin, we are talking about, for example, in a literal way, the suburban part of a city. We are talking about people that are not so well positioned in their status within the societal hierarchy, perhaps. But sometimes that is due to both to circumstances of physics. If you are, people tend to be attracted and tend to agglomerate around interest, and that inevitably creates margins around those points of interest, both in the geographical way and cultural way. But if you go there, if you know those people, they, in that moment, through the context device that is photography, you make them the center, at least for a certain period of time. So how do you navigate this shift, this on the perceptual frame that you carry with you with your photographic vision?
Yeah, well, that is it brings the margin to the center. That's the whole purpose of it. You brings the margin, because the margins is a social construct.
Margins, as it is a physical one, because
is a physical one. Is a physical one because society has created this physical distance. But margins is just a social contrast, a social construct. So by pointing the lens to the margins, you bring what is told to the margins that's never been represented to the mainstream, so the center, in this case, the photography world, so they can finally, also the margins have their own saying, also the margins being represented by the margins, and suddenly the meaning of margins, it gets blurred, because
it's diluted in your experience.
You feel marginalized only when you are not represented. You don't feel marginalized because you don't live in the center of Milan. You can want to live also in the most peripheral area, but most of the time you feel marginalized because society doesn't want to include you. But that is a social construct. It's not only about physical, that you live in the periphery. That is just, it comes from the social construct.
How do you articulate both realities? Let's say the social construct part of it, and the fact that you are in reality far from your work, if you have to live further, because there is no place for everyone in any given center.
I don't understand what you mean then.
So, for example, if you bring the margin to the center, you inevitably create other margins, because our attention is focused on one point, and our attention as photography is fragmented. And if you pull people's attention to something, the margins of that attention, it will become something else.
But that's what I'm saying. I don't want to bring, I mean, me personally, but generally speaking, I'm not saying to bring the margin to the centers. The margins are the margins, meaning that you want to create this social construct is okay, but just give dignity to the people living in that area, and perhaps stop talking about the margins from people from the center. Just leave the people from the margins talking about their own reality. rather than teaching them how to talk about their own reality. That's what I'm saying. And then suddenly this distinction between margin and center it gets a bit blurred. You think you have possibilities only if you don't stay in a small country and go to the big city to study at the university. No, but then, and that is, it can be like the a sort of really kind of basic explanation of margin and center. But the two things that can easily coexist, people that, there is some people that don't really want to belong to the center, but at the same time, they want to be respected and see the margins, not margins as forgotten part of society, like the suburbs. In Romanzo Meticcio, I use the margins as not the centers of the city, so the suburbs, that most of the times are completely forgotten from the municipality, where most of the times are just left in there the people that are not deemed to be representative of living in the center. So what I'm trying to say is not about bringing who has been marginalized to live in the center, but what I'm is
No,
more.
to the center of the tension. I
Yeah,
understood.
and yeah, but that's why then I talk also about intersectionality. So it's not that there is a race of then who is who goes to the center and who wins the biggest attention when it comes of talking about the margins. It's not about that. It's more about having finally the right to be represented by someone that lives the reality of whatever you want to represent. Is not anymore someone that comes from the outside imposing his vision of what is the reality of the margins, but it's someone finally coming from the margins, telling the story of the margins. It can be also someone from the center going to the margins, because then I really don't like this kind of what is happening in the art world with this hyper, let's say, I don't want to be kind of misinterpreted, but hyper woke situation where you can only talk about the people you represent. Who do you represent? I don't represent. It ends up that if you bring this kind of way of thinking to the extreme, you can take picture only of yourself. I couldn't take picture of my mom, for instance, because she's a woman already, and I cannot represent her needs. So, of course, everybody is entitled to talk about everybody, but is a matter of positionality, content, and they're willing to experience something that for you is not your immediate background. So if you have this kind of attitude, you can talk about that, and suddenly you become someone that speaks in the margins for the margin as someone from the margins. So I'm not saying that only people from a certain situation can talk about certain situation. I'm just saying that it's fundamental to give counter narratives, and I think that it can be done only if you embrace the margins, if you are able to kind of step off of your comfort zone, step off of what has been taught to you up to this point, and being keen to shake a bit the fundaments of your house. Be keen to shake a bit what kind of constitutes your the fixed point of your persona. When you're keen to do that, then I think you are also able to offer counter narratives to the main one. So I had to do that, for instance, in Romanzo Meticcio. I didn't know that my grandmother on my father's side was Slovenian. I found it out only by kind of researching into her drawers, and I found her documents of Italianization, where she was forced to become Italian, sign the documents to become Italian, and then become German, and then go back to Italian, but never allowed to be back again Slovenian as she was. Or my grandmother from Colombia, when I showed her all the manifestos post-fascism, where they were kind of connecting the idea of whiteness with pureness and blackness with dirt, Calimero and all this kind of situation in Italy. And I had to accept their reaction, which was different than what I was expecting. And I had to also kind of analyze my family in a way that, my grandfather, Sicilian, was a fascist. married a Colombian brown woman. At the same time, my grandfather on my dad's side, the person from Friuli, was a partisan that married a Slovenian woman. They both saved each other's life during the Second World War. So one let him know that a group of partisans was about to attack the fascist group, and vice versa. And this is a huge contradiction, and also see my grandfather fascist being really kind of macho, typical, like the what you can think, better than me, the stereotype of a Mediterranean man in negative. He was, and I need to be honest about it. That doesn't take away the love that he gave me and the good relationship we had, because I loved him, but I cannot ignore how he was treating my mom, my grandmother, and the ideas he had for a certain period of his life. And so this means somehow also shake certain memories I had with him, certain teaching he gave me. But it's necessary, because then I need to be able to kind of be critical of what is in me in terms of cultural heritage, to then being able to relate it to the external world. So I think that this attitude is somehow fundamental to kind of research and use photography in a way that wants to bring new narratives, new points of view, not impose them, not having them as like this is the new reality. That is not, it's not the case, but more like, look, we've been told that this and that from day one, but what if we add to the narrative also this point of view, this other point of view? Then suddenly, I don't know, you have a richness also of
Yes, I think you are putting it beautifully, both when you talk about the need for well, each of us individually, we are very limited. We have a very narrow vision of the world because our senses and our mental abilities are very narrow. So if you have other human fellows watching some other points, and if you can bring kind of triangulate a few, you will have a much completer picture and more rich. And if I am understanding well, it's not so much as imposing as you say. It's not just a political act, but it's more of making it available for whoever may be interested in learning about that people. Also, I think it's wonderful the way you have put it, summarize it all, that you say if you are only able to talk about what you know, you end up photographing yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the opposite of what you need to overcome our fear of the unknown, our fear of who is different, and that's the contrary.
And you create segregation. That's when it comes this hyper extreme, everything that is extremism, everything that ends with ism, that is teaching from Bob Marley and the Rastafari community, everything that finishes with ism is an issue. But that I really believe so. I have really few beliefs that I have, like, that are kind of the core of my persona, and that is, I think any extremism is a huge problem. So like when you push the concept to this extreme, you create segregation. When there is fear of interacting with the unknown, that is really dangerous. Of course, we need to be aware, especially white people, and especially the Western, because it's not only a matter of white people, it's just the Western world. Because now everybody born and raised in the Western world, they have a certain education and a certain way of behaving that is typical of the Western world. And when you go to any other country, those people born in those countries, they can realize that. I mean, I have a Colombian cultural heritage. I would never say that I'm Colombian because I was born and raised in Italy. So my everything of me doesn't speak Palmyra. It speaks Sicily and a bit of Friuli. No, but what I'm trying to say is that we need to eliminate the attitude of the photographers of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, which were primarily white, looking for the exotic and projecting their own imagination onto the exotic, disregarding completely what they were experiencing, the society they had in front of them, and that's it. But it cannot be now become fear of talking about the other. It should be rather the opposite. You should learn from the mistake made in the past and learn that you need to kind of have a certain attitude. And of course, before starting to talk about the others, I do really believe that you should start to talk about, before traveling to places far away from your house, you should start to kind of look around at home, and you will find perhaps the same issues that you're looking for in other countries, you find them at home. And so if you learn first how to talk about the issues you have at home, then you have also a terms of comparison when you go to talk about the same issue.
Well, I think that we have some proclivity historically and individually to the just the opposite, because whatever is far away from you, you can more comfortably observe it. For example, was told once by a teacher that pointed out that the first ever science to came as such was perhaps astronomy. That's very far from us, and the most recent is perhaps psychology. So whatever is so close to us that it's more difficult to make it an object of our study, it's a natural proclivity. But I think I understand what you say. I have some
that is right, but then where intellect comes into place. We are animals, a natural proclivity, so we tend to organize our life in hierarchy as a natural proclivity. Like as a natural proclivity, we live like.
Well, I would say that another word for hierarchy, if we are talking in the biological sense, we would say priority.
Yeah,
I would say, and priority derives into some kind of hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly. Eventually, they go to a certain hierarchy, and hierarchy is not necessarily, I think, a really bad term. Like I create my own hierarchy when it came of the month of June. I had to get my master degree, so I had to think more about that one than the exhibition I will have in August about Romanzo Meticcio in Canada. So I made my own hierarchy, but it's not that something is less important than the other one. But what I was trying to say is that like intellect comes when our natural tendencies come into play. So then you need to make it work, start to make it work, no? And we have all the tools right now for doing that. So I don't think that it's just if there is kind of this old way of behaving and photographing, and I don't think there is any type of justification right now, because we have all the instruments to be well educated and approach photography and approach representation in the right ways. And usually, and usually when we also talk about problems that are far away, is because somehow is also that I'm not a psychologist, but I read a book that was super interesting about, I don't remember the title, but they were talking about this thing that we look for things far away that are really similar to the things we have at home, because far away, as you said, we can observe them easily, a bit
safely.
Safely. There we go. You say safely. If we observe the same thing in our own family, you need to shake yourself. You need to shake everything that constitutes yourself and that you are kind of assured of. So you need to start to create doubts in your own persona. And I think that is the key point. When you do that, then you are ready also when you do that in your house, and that doesn't have to be necessarily hyper personal project that you talk about. No, it can be like starting from a personal experience. You do it within your, the place where you live, that you know really well, because you know how to interact with people, you know how the body language of a person work, because when you go to other places, it's also important to understand these things. Like you cannot stay 2 weeks in Portugal to make a project about Portugal politically. You can make it aesthetically, but not politically, because you need to understand the language, but more so what is kind of untold, right? So what the silence, what does it mean a silence in a given culture? What does it mean the hand gesture in a given culture? What does it mean a certain expression? And these things you can know it only by experiencing really much a certain given place. And most of the time we don't even realize at our house, at our home, what we have in terms of cultural richness or signifiers that we don't grasp. At least I was for me like that in Friuli. I didn't know it, the region and certain element of my culture, and also certain elements that, for instance, my grandmother on my dad's side had before I left the region. Because everything was routine for me, everything was given, and everything was without a meaning. When I left and I came back after 3-4 years, I started to be interested and I started to wonder why, and I started to find cultural meaning in everything, in many elements of what it was my daily routine back in Italy. And then it becomes interesting, because then it becomes like how superficial your gaze must be if you want to talk about the others, but you don't even know who the hell you are. No, like it is rhetorical, but it works really much, I think, like that. We just missed this part. We went from patronizing other cultures to kind of almost not talking about nothing else than what you like, your daily routine, or what is within your persona. And again, there is a lot in between.
You know, I think life is like a pendulum, never
Yeah.
stays in the center.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
go, you balance ourselves, exaggerating in one direction or the
Yeah.
other, hopefully in an alternative way. So I can imagine that framing these communities as marginal in a way that avoids perpetuating that very label
Yeah.
can be challenging. So how do you navigate this challenging and still honoring their lived experiences, and as you beautifully do in your photographs?
Thank you. And yeah, I think trying to be honest, like the places I've been photographing so far is home. So I come from there. So I can navigate those places quite easily. For me, it would be a challenge. I would like to do it at a certain point of my career to do it in a place where I'm not belonging. You know, studying the same themes that I'm studying in my practice, but doing it in a place where I don't belong to the place. To challenge myself, to see how eventually I will react, and how my gaze would kind of, and my sense of representation would kind of adjust to that situation. For my project now in Romanzo Meticcio, I've been photographing the places where I grew up. So, so in terms of being in the landscape and representing the landscape, it was quite yeah, it was easy, but a challenge not to be kind of banal. So I had to learn how to see again home, which is not easy. And in terms of with people, because then I use a lot of portraiture, and I just try to be honest, and I really try to be honest, explain my project, and I have conversations with the people I photograph, and sometimes there is contrast, which is really kind of good, and there is never kind of the urge to impose a vision, but it's really much about confronting. And I'm also super keen to give up for pictures. So like I'm really honest in what I do. So when, for instance, I portray, I always leave a print. When I go to the darkroom, I send the contact sheets back, and I ask them to choose their favorite picture, which is 90% of the time is my least favorite picture, because like, but it happens to me as well. Like I look for vulnerability when I take a portrait. So I always wait the moment in which perhaps you don't find yourself attractive to the fullest, but you find yourself weak. And there is some people that don't want to be kind of shown in their weaknesses. They just want to be shown in what they are proud of. And you've got to respect that. So of course, when they sign the form, I'm free to do whatever I want with those 10 pictures because I know the content of the form. Because most of the time, the people that signs it, they do it because you ask them, but they don't read. And so for me is really important just to be honest and say like, look, this is how I work. I look for some certain vulnerability that then the viewer can somehow relate his own experience to the vulnerability you are showing in the moment.
So you verbalize all that? Or?
Yes, yeah. And then I also verbalize the fact that the vulnerability is not that a portrait says 1,000 words, as many times I see these sentences, or a portrait can represent a person. A photograph can never represent the complexity of a human being. Like human beings are super complex, I think, beings. And one photograph cannot represent, how can you represent a human with one photograph? But you can give some emotions with the photograph. So I always look for emotion, and sometimes the emotion is not kind of, it doesn't come through your body in the prettiest way, or at least how we intend to look good. And I always explain that, and I always look for that. And when I have it, I show it. And if they say I don't like the picture, for me it's okay. It's not the problem, and you can use it. But if they say to me, I don't like the picture, please don't use it because I don't feel comfortable to be kind of represented in your story in this way. I know that you explain me that you are not representing me as a persona, but it's a story. So it's almost you become an actor in it, no? But I just give up the picture. I don't go against the people that actually allow me to create at the end of the day.
So you project that respect in the partnership, let's call it, perhaps, with the people you photograph, and being honest and observing people it's the best we can do.
Yeah, it pays off also because then it allows you to get really in touch with the person, because then if you're also honest with yourself, you wouldn't stop to go to a person just because it doesn't allow you to use the picture that you think it would be great for your work. You just keep on going, and you would install. I'm just telling my experiences. So and then you install a relationship where the person himself asks you, how is it going, the master? How is it going? This, but so the book is coming out or not? Did you find the money to do it? And they ask you, and sometimes you just make jokes, and I say no, but the book is not coming out just because you don't want me to put your picture in it, and we won't sell without that. So you make jokes, and then suddenly, yeah, they understand your needs, and are never being refused a picture, even the more kind of personal one. But I think it comes always to be honest with the person that you are photographing, because at least I don't see it. I think that sometimes this word collaboration has been abused. I think photography is always a collaborative. It's not collaborative only when you were doing colonial photography or street photography. That is not collaboration. But generally speaking, even if it's a normal portrait, is performative and collaborative always, because
is at least relational.
Yeah, it's relational, but also collaborative, because I photograph 4x5, so I need to install the camera, put it on the tripod. You have to be asked to take a picture, because I cannot steal a picture, no? So you are aware that I'm doing it. It takes at least 40 minutes to an hour to take a portrait with a 4x5, 2 or 3 good ones, and so yeah, I see it always a collaboration. I will never do any project if I don't have people to photograph, and so it's just by definition a collaboration. But I always seen, but it's an unbalanced collaboration. I mean, for me at least, I have to be honest to say that it's really much unbalanced, because the collaboration is for me. the people I photograph, at least after we spend time together, they carry on doing their life, and the beauty of it is the moment we spend together, as we do with our friends, having a nice conversation, having and I'm really aware about the fact that I'm privileged that I find sometimes people that are willing to dedicate some of their time for my researches. And it's not given, this thing, because usually people work, you need to pay the bills, you have a family, you have really kind of issues, especially in Italy, that you face every day when it comes of bills, when it comes of like the cost of life, life, and not being grateful and not seeing yourself as a privilege when someone gives you 30 minutes, 1 hour of their time. I think is just absurd, and it's not rhetoric, but it is really what it is. That at the end of the day, they will have a good portrait eventually, but they spend the time mostly for you to achieve what you need to achieve with your research. And so it's always, you have always to be aware, I think, of that. And when you're aware of that, and when you're aware that eventually you are receiving more than giving, you got to be honest.
Absolutely. Well said. So, in Romanzo Meticcio, we explored suburban Italy, we have been talking about, and this suburb feels both socially fragmented and culturally overlooked, as you have explained. What do you think draws photographers to these transitional peripheral spaces? And do you see the suburb as an organic extension of the city, or as a kind of a separate cultural mechanism altogether?
Well, what draws me as being like my family background and the fact that I live there. So as I was saying before, like I wanted to start to talk about something that um, I I knew, or better, I wanted to explore, to get to know better, to better understand me as a person and me as a artist, to be able to position myself. So it comes from this need, and also from the need to contextualize my family background, because now I didn't live in Italy for 12 years, I think. And when I went back for a period, well, really, I didn't go back for 3 years and a half or something. So when I was living in Australia, then I was accepted in KBK. I just did kind of a small pit stop in Italy. But then, well, long story short, I couldn't adapt much to the Dutch culture and to the assignments I was given at university. I was always photographing like in a really superficial way, taking nice picture. Technically, I know how to use the camera and this kind of stuff, or I learned how to use it, but I wasn't able to scratch beyond the surface of things. And of course, I speak English, and in the Netherlands they all speak really good English. But speaking to someone with a kind of with their own language is different. So then I went back to Italy, and I wanted to look for things there. And yeah, so, and I saw how the country is struggling to talk about multicultural, struggling a lot to connect the idea of blackness with Italianness. They is struggling. It's still really anchored to a sort of identity that was given in the 30s and 40s by Mussolini, even though we keep on saying that fascism is over. Politically, perhaps yes, but what that is the problem that I saw in Italy, that is that people sees it, especially politicians, but also the people, because eventually, if you see who's running the country right now, I mean, she's being elected with democratic election. It's not that she just put herself in there. So the people, they need to also take their own responsibility. Is really anchored in this past, and we are not able to kind of understand how fascism. And I think that the only one that can really understand what fascism is Spain and Portugal. It was not only political, it was mostly cultural. The political, yeah, is gone, but as is gone so many political movement in the past, right? But we don't have to underestimate how fascism was a cultural movement that have shaped a country, a young country that was Italy at the time, was just unified. There was a huge division, north and south. This I say it and I take responsibility that the unification of Italy didn't happen how they tell us in school, like let's become all a unified country, but was a colonial war starting from the north that colonized the south. That was the first, colonial. Therefore, it was the first colony of the newborn state Italy. It was heavily fragmented because fascism happened 20 years later, 30, no, was unification was, I think with dates I'm really bad, but I think happens 50 years later, it was 871, fascism started the process, let's say immediately after the First World War, so 1920, when Mussolini started to do his own stuff, perhaps a bit earlier. Now with the dates I'm really bad, but what I'm trying to say is that it has an origin and it's not only political, it's mostly cultural.
Talking about culture
Yeah,
and reflecting a bit, if you allow me, on this device, let's call it, that is the suburbs of a city. How do you look to the suburb itself as in relation to the city? Do you think that is its own cultural thing happening?
yeah. Well, no,
What's different? What is the suburb?
no, I don't think that culturally there is I mean, how I see them is they're all part of the same culture, which is in this case Italian culture. So the suburbs and the city centers are all part of the same identity, which is Italian identity, which cannot be declined in few points. It cannot be one. It's many. So they're all part, but they are not represented. So they become marginalized. And so then this become margins, and the people in there become marginalized, and the people in there are always Italian, but when this kind of when then because you have only one storyline to follow, that was what I was trying to say also before, the counter narratives helps not to kind of eliminate the suburbs, because that is not the purpose, to eliminate suburbs, because is not that the thing, but to eliminate the suburbs we have in our mind in terms of dividing people in citizen A, citizen B, citizen C, and citizen Z. That for me is the problem right now. That is not the let's say the urbanistic landscape, which is in any case was created to make hierarchical division, the suburbs and the center, all this kind of stuff. But the issue is that the representation and the narratives associated with it. So for me, they are all part of one identity, which is Italian identity, that is not monolithic. Within Italian identity, there is fluidity. You have, it changes, but the same, I think, is in any country. Already in any given country, the northern part of the country is different from the southern part of the country, generally speaking. I don't know, I see Italian in Italy, and Italian from the north, from Milano, is completely different than the place where I was born in Sicily, in Milazzo. There is no terms of comparison culturally, but also physically, with the physical aspect. So I really think that the suburbs, the center, they're all part of the same culture and the same identity. With the difference is that the mainstream narrative doesn't think so. The mainstream narrative thinks that there is one Italian identity, one way of seeing yourself as Italian, and if you are not kind of matching all the requirements of that given identity that was given by the fascists, because then going back to before that I forgot to say, Mussolini had the genius to understand that the country was looking for a common identity, and he tried to give one.
Well, I'm not so so versed in the political history of Italy and political in general, let's say. But I'm trying to investigate for myself and with your help, perhaps, if that is that emerges because of the organic dynamics that naturally occur with the development of cities, and if that is defined enough culture setting for example, people go to suburbans to sleep, they go to the center of the city to work, so that give origin to different dynamics and different cultural experience. If you think that way, if you can extrapolate your experience in Italy and perhaps observe other cities, other realities, and have some conclusion what a suburban is in relation to the city.
Oh, that is a difficult. I wouldn't. Oh, yeah, that I wouldn't. If I have to say that, like, really, I don't think there is a one answer to give you, to be honest, because is I think that is everything I've been said so far. That is how I think the relationship between. Of course, like if I have to be kind of really concise, I would say that generally speaking, the suburbs of the city has always been created to kind of get rid of the unwanted people. And when
On purpose, you mean?
on purpose, like in Italy, you have them.
Or sure,
Yeah,
or just because
in
it's the
Italy, you have
nature
them
of the dynamics and
yeah, in Italy,
interactions.
you have them on purpose. Like you have like the places that I photographed in Romanzo Meticcio. Those places were in the 80s only for the immigrant from the south, which were considered monkeys and dirty and thieves. And then in there they started to have the new immigration of Nigerians in Italy, then Albanian, and you had now the Pakistani or whatever. So they were all relegated there. They were not allowed to be in the center unless there were no social distinctions. So what I'm trying to say is that if socially and financially you are worth to be in the center, it doesn't matter your cultural background, you would be in the center, because then it's about economics is and all this kind of stuff. But if socially you are not from a social position of power, you will be positioned at the margins. So that is how I think the periphery, at least the places where I was born, has been created. The same Mussolini himself, he created Città di Fondazione, which are these foundation cities, which are cities basically made out of nowhere, from reclaimed land. So he was using all the people, mostly Slavic people, he was bringing in the concentration camp, reclaiming a swamp, basically, have them die there because it was full of disease and everything, and then build a fascist city. And the fascist city was organized with an urbanistic plan in hierarchy. And this hierarchical order is still today, because the ones that were used to
So
live.
it was structured like that from the beginning. Yeah,
It was
I
structured
understand.
from the beginning. And now it carries on. It carries on. But now is in different dynamics. So it's also because you are in a more evolved capitalistic society, and also fascism now is different than when it was back in the day. So and has to deal with capitalism, which Mussolini was against. So it has also this contradiction in it right now. But I don't know. I take as an example. I can take maybe I'm say something wrong. Lisbon was at least what my brother was saying. Also, a good friend of mine, Federico Calavarino, was saying to me 10 years ago was way more livable, and it stayed the same in terms of, I think, the cost of life compared to the rest of Europe is really low. But then you had 10 years, 15 years ago, Italian in pension that were coming to live in Lisbon with the money of their pension. They could live comfortably. Expats coming. And so suddenly Lisbon started to have a price range that the locals could not afford anymore to live. So they had to move outside of the city, keeping the job in the city, and they had to commute because they couldn't afford anymore a rent in Lisbon, which now costs as any other European capital. Having the cost of life a bit cheaper because of the minimum wage in Portugal is a bit lower than in Italy, for instance. Not that much, but let's compare it to the Netherlands. So a Dutch person that goes to Portugal or Italy to eat outside and spends only 20 euro and eats really well, a lot, and all this kind of stuff is unimaginable here in Belgium or in Portugal or in the Netherlands. So when expats come and they can afford houses that the locals cannot anymore, then suddenly the prices of the apartments, of the flats, of the rent, they go up, and the local cannot afford it anymore, and then they are pushed to the margins. So it's not done kind of in a way you cannot stay there, you don't count, go to the margins, but is implicit because you force it, because you cannot. So there is always, I think, this kind of relation. But I think that that is I think how it is in capitalistic society. No, there is always this kind of. But for me, the important element is that the right representation given to what is considered,
at least in terms of their stories that they can share, and
also
you contribute to make those stories available and those narratives. About narratives, I would like to, if you allow me, to transition a bit for your conceptualization of the narrative through the photo book themselves. And you can, of course, keep giving your those precious testimony of detailed political vision and the experience of your project itself. But I would start asking, what do you think is the true potential of the photo book as a narrative device? And I am asking this, the way you can structure a literary book, a romance, for example, it's more well defined in terms of framework. Do you think there is a possibility to apply, to experiment some of those structures to a photo book?
I hope not. I mean, you can do it.
Tell me more.
Yeah, I think you can do it. And you have already now, like if you see the Aperture Prize or any prize that you have the historical photo book or something like that. No, I don't remember. A dear friend of mine, Nicola Moscelli, who made Dead End, was shortlisted for the Aperture photo book, but was in the section, I think, research or something like that. And his photo book is really about really heavy research. So is the text apparatus is fundamental, and you have to read it. Otherwise, there is no sense of having the book. So I think you can do it, but I hope that.
I'm not suggesting that you have to put text within the photo book. I'm just asking myself out loud if one can structure the narrative in the photo book, still being mainly visual, in sections, in relations like you can see in romance, in literature.
I think that, at least in my opinion, the full potential of the photo book is just, thanks God, not being able to be as complete as a novel or a movie, because it pushes you, the viewer, the person, to really be proactive onto what you're seeing. And that is, I think, sometimes the misconception of the photo book. Like, either you have these photo books full of texts. I don't know. I just bought, for instance, race stories from Aperture, and then you're kind of guided. But then, for instance, a photo books like Gregory Alper, where there is no text of whatsoever. There is really no text, zero at all. It takes to read that book as much as it takes you, if you do it properly, as much as it takes you to read a 300 pages book. Because the 300 pages books, it takes you for the quantity of the words that you have to process and perhaps the difficulty and all this kind of stuff. But the plate is already served. is there. It's just up to you to finish it to your own pace. When you get the photography, you just have the ingredients, but then you have to combine them to have a tasteful plate. What I'm trying to say in that when you look at the photo book and you look at the images, you need to do a lot of effort to kind of get into the story, because then you have your own way of reading the images, which is given by your cultural background, your experience, and all this kind of stuff. You need to try to think about the photographer who made it, the intention he had, how you perceive it, and so I think that I hope it doesn't become like a novel, because the photo books has this kind of, I think, incompleteness that is fundamental to have people question if you read it with the right attitude. Having said that, I think that certain works, like in Romanzo Meticcio, I try to use less text that I did in Sclavanie, because I wanted to challenge myself in indeed translating all my research into images, because that is the challenge for a photographer, like to be able to tell the story only using images. That is really complex. But when you talk about representation
So, how do you think about the structure of the narrative in a photo book?
well, it depends on the photo book. In Romanzo Meticcio, for instance, I taking into account all the elements that there is for the project. I thought about the work needs to be kind of understood and needs to stand only through my images. So like the narrative arc, I work on the edit first only of my images, and then I add all the rest. But also in there was the need to have some texts, because like I didn't want to have heavy essays, but small essays that were talking about the themes, not my work, so they could give you a different point of and another point of view to the images. In that case, I found it fundamental to have it a bit, because I'm talking about really sensitive topics: fascism, representation of the others, the history of the country. So I'm talking about certain things that not everybody could be familiar with, and not easy to understand immediately if you are not from the country. So as a bit of context in certain projects, you need to kind of provide it, because otherwise you risk to simplify something really complex, and you don't really want that. But there are some projects where text is not really needed, and I think if I think about Gregory Alper, that is and I can give, I think, with Gregory Alper the best example in both scenarios. Like in his, I think is in all his book there is no text, but when he went to explore the others, so when he made a work in Guadeloupe, that book is the only book he produces, I think, is called Let the Sun Be, I think, and he was I think published by Aperture in collaboration with the Hermes Foundation. In that book, he has a long interview and a long text, because he felt the need to contextualize the work, where he was of a white man going to Guadeloupe representing the others, and in a small frame of time, because it was a commission, and I think he worked on it only for 3 months. So being an outsider representing someone other and doing so only in 3 months made him feel uncomfortable to, I think that is my assumption, to kind of put out there a work only with images, but he needed some text to give a certain context and position himself as a maker. And instead in others where he talks about his homeland, more about feelings, he doesn't need the text really, because you can grasp that Buffalo is a post-industrial city. You can grasp that there are the drama that happens in America overall, politically, socially. You can grasp all this feeling, but he doesn't want to talk about that in specifically, but he wants to give these feelings that he calls, I think, magic realism or this sort of nature, and he does really well. But in the moment in which he didn't feel super sure about what he did in representing the other, for several reasons in that project, he used some text. So I think that is really goes project by project. Certain projects needs at least to be contextualized, at least that, because then otherwise, as I said before, the risk is that to render banal something that is really complex and complicated. But I really hope that photo books won't become like a novel, because otherwise there is like and I don't want to be taken wrong that if you read the novel you don't have to think. Right? This is not what I'm saying.
Well,
But
there are all kinds of novels, so I
yeah,
suppose
but
there is
generally
space
speaking,
for some experiment at
yeah,
least.
but also let's say the lightest one. I mean, you always have to think, you always have to, but usually when you read a novel or when you watch a movie, you as a viewer or as a person that consumes whatever is in front of him, you are given more instruments to navigate the story. With photography, you are constantly given some hints, but then it's up to you to go beyond just the iconography of what you see and learn to see beyond the simplistic iconography in a picture and see metaphysically or not. So that is what I really like about the medium of photography, that it pushes you to really have an attitude that it is a critical attitude. So you need to do your own research, you need to try to figure out the reason why. And the funny thing is that you would have like a different way of reading the same book by different people. So that is also quite interesting.
So yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. So in your opinion, photobook is a kind of the opposite of a passive reading for sure. So I would like now to speak a bit of your other project that you have been alluding to here and there. So Sclavanie, and can you start perhaps to briefly explain and tell us what this project is about?
Yeah, the work is well, the work was my graduation work at KBK, and as I think I was mentioning a bit before, it came from this unsatisfaction of what I was producing in my bachelor and during my studies. I was struggling in understanding certain teachers of mine because of course English is not my first language and sometimes it wasn't also theirs, and the way of talking of an Italian is different than a Dutch person. Also the terminology and how sentences are structured. So I was really having a hard time to understand, yeah, step out of your comfort zone and all this kind of stuff when I was thinking, yeah, but this is the first time I do all of these things. I said, it's not my comfort zone. So I was struggling, and then I started to kind of let the picture I was taking talking to me. And I was seeing that I was just doing superficial stuff. I was just looking for like a really good image to come back to class with, but not content. Or at least I thought there was some content, but I was always surfing on the superficial side of the things. And so I went back home and I started to in Friuli, so where I grew up, and suddenly I started to see home in a different way. I started to see so many cultural signifiers in what was my old routine. I started to find out so many things about the region that I never knew about. Four official languages: Italian, Friulan, Slovenian, and German, which is absurd. It's the only region in Europe with four official languages spoken, written, and everything. I started to get to know a bit better about the background of my family. And then, most importantly, while I was photographing in one of these small village, in the mountain village by the border with Slovenia, I met this man. There was like we had a small conversation. We spent the afternoon together actually, and I was explaining. He was talking to me, describing my father when he was playing soccer in this kind of small tournaments, and he knew my father because he described it very well. And then he looked at me and said, like, why don't you speak Slovenian in Slovenia? Which is one of the few things I can understand in any case. And he said to me, and I said to him, like, well, it's as simple as that, because I'm not. And so I've never kind of was never kind of one of the things to learn it. And then he points to this kind of broken house, whatever. And he said, but yeah, but your grandmother comes from there. And so I thought it was a bit crazy. He was a bit old, the only one in this abandoned village. He was the only one, the only person left to live there. So I thought, okay, I mean, he must have, I don't know, made some wrong association. God knows what the memory does when you reach that age. And I went back home and I said to my father the story, and he said like, yeah, yeah, no, no, it is true. Like grandma was Slovenian, and I knew it when I was 30 by accident because I came back earlier from work and I heard her talking to her sister, and I heard her talking to her sister in the kitchen in Slovenian, and then was the first time I realized it, and I asked, "How come you speak the language?" And she explained to me her origin, but I never. My father was saying to me, I never kind of deepen the conversation because I found it bizarre that we've never been told about that. He said, but yeah, and he said like to me like that, but those are those days we didn't ask much to our parents. Whatever we were told, we accepted it, but we didn't, ask for more. And this thing really kind of intrigued me. So then where it started my willingness to work on Sclavanie is a kind of which is a project that talks about the importance of a cultural and linguistic minorities in Italy, and um, how the contemporary society is dealing with that, and how we deal with that when it comes of the depopulation of mountain villages. So the loss of a certain culture and sometimes of a certain language. So that it was Sclavania was the project about was a bit perhaps not immature, but with a lot of potential. And because I was still I was working on Sclavania and Romanzo Meticcio at the same time during the graduation. And I put Romanzo Meticcio on the side because I felt that I wasn't really ready to talk about certain topics in terms of also knowledge, personal knowledge. And also, mainly because of that, and knowledge of my family. So I needed to kind of let it develop a bit more organically without rushing it. And so I decided to go with Sclavania, which is not more simple in terms of themes, but it was more, I would say, compatible with the deadline given by the academy. So that was the project that I'm expanding it right now with my master with a new project called Dolina that talks about the importance of cultural minorities and linguistic minorities, but this time I focus on the Legge Gentile, the Gentile law issued in 1923 that aimed to eliminate any cultural and linguistic minority in Italy in order to impose a new Italian identity, a new Italianness. And this culture and these languages survive in the region Friuli through mythology and oral tradition. So my new project explored the importance of mythology and oral tradition in preserving a culture. So then, and I try to challenge the idea of documentary photography, especially the connection we often do to the concept of truthfulness and reality, and how we can use archival material that have been used to create separation to tell a counter narrative. So let's say my project in the Master Dolina is a sort of evolution that was Sclavanie, and Romanzo Meticcio is almost functions almost as a manifesto of what is my research broadly about history, cultural identity, and how individual and collective memory meet each other and create the always evolving identity of a country. So that is kind of the themes I'm really interested about. I hope to have clear, but is I try to kind of condense it a bit. But let's say that my master project is an evolution of what Sclavanie was. That was also my first photo book, and but the theme the project is about that. Maybe Sclavanie is more about actually like the depopulation and repopulation of mountain villages in the border, and so how this culture can survive, if they will survive with this new repopulation of abandoned villages in Italy, because most of the time you have people from the city ironically enough, from the center looking for some margins for to some isolation. But sometimes these villages are taken over by people that don't really know the story of the landscape, so they almost want to recreate their small reality back in the city in a place that is not meant to be treated in that way. So Sclavanie was a bit more about this issue, that the depopulation of mountain villages.
And
Instead,
this project demanded your return to these places that were significant to your family's past, as well as for your own as a child. And I can only imagine that you would carry with you some memories, some expectations, some anticipation what those images could be. So first, I would ask, how aware were you of those expectations, if you conduct yourself like that, and how did these mental images contrast with the reality that you have chosen to put in front of your camera?
you know that I had, to be honest, no expectation, because in a sense that when I started to find out more about the region where I grew up, I was just like, yeah, blank page. The only advantage I had it was that I could move like a local. I spoke the language, all the languages but Slovenian, so I spoke Italian and Friulan. I knew the region, so I grew up in there. So I could move like a local and almost not be noticed because I'm part of the organism. But I was seeing everything as if I was a foreigner because it was everything new to me. Everything was starting to kind of have to see in a different light. So it was like I didn't have any expectation with it, and that was, I think, the great element of the project, that it was refreshing to see something that you consider home in a new completely way, but yet being able to exploring it, knowing everything of that region, meaning being grow up in there, so knowing how to move, knowing how to talk to people, knowing the meaning of a certain facial expression more than a certain gesture with the hands. So it was really interesting to kind of at least for me, experience home as a foreigner, like being amazed by all the cultural element I could see now, where before I was seeing only, yeah, only periphery, only countryside, nothing really interesting, boring. I can't wait to live from here. So where I was seeing these elements, now I see cultural references that are quite interesting. So for me, it was quite a journey to reread home in this way.
So, well, I think can speak for both Sclavanie and Romanzo Meticcio that these places have been shaped and changed by processes like migration, economic transformation, and cultural shifts. How do you think these communities can maintain their cultural and social distinctiveness while navigating these new times, these influences,
Well,
based on your experience and visual experience of photographing those?
I think that first of all, by being proud of having this kind of cultural heritage, because what struck me the most, especially in Scavania, is that the people living in this borderland, they didn't really give much. My grandmother was an example of it. In certain ways, also my family didn't give. They underestimated what they have and what they are culturally, only because indeed are not part of the center, so they're not doing what is considered to be a really important job. They were seeing themselves as simple, as really nothing.
So, do you see? Sorry for interrupting again, but do you see this dichotomy between center and the periphery as a direct correlation to perception of self-value, culturally speaking?
Of course. If you've always been told that you are nothing and you are never represented, you start to believe that you are nothing and you're not worth to be represented. But that is we see it like in society, like yeah, what happened, there is lack of representation of certain type of people, and suddenly you are not accepting your body as it is because you want to fit what is represented, and because you never see yourself represented. So of course, that is a consequence. If you live in a society where you are never represented and never felt you worth something, you start to believe that what you have is not worth something, is worth nothing. And you look for the things that you are kind of told that are worth. It's important to be represented in a given community, even if your group is kind of a minority or not part of the majority. If it means something, is the representation, I think, is really fundamental.
We are approaching the end of our conversation. It was really a privilege to have your insights and to be able to think aloud with your voice and mine together. Maybe you can just point us to something that you are doing at the present. Where can people see you?
Well, you can find me on website davidedegano.com, all social media with my name. You just find me. Sometimes I'm not super active in social media as I should be, but you find the news. And and now I'm working on a new project. It's called indeed Dolina. Soon I will make some posts with few kind of introduction elements to the work. The work is really different from Sclavanie and Romanzo Meticcio in terms of visual. It's really much different, I have to say. Not really much, but has a different attitude to it. So I talk about mythology, I talk about oral tradition. So I talk about elements that are not graspable in images, and so I had to somehow turn them into images. And I'm looking for funding for creating and publishing the book. So that is what I will be doing in the near future. And then, of course, the tour of presentation of Romanzo Meticcio book will start again in September. We stop now because of my exams and everything, and then there is the summer. So in September we start. We don't have fixed dates yet, but there will be go back home in Sicily. So we will be in Palermo, then we go to Catania, and hopefully home in Milazzo, and of course in Modica. And then I will be exhibiting Romanzo Meticcio in Canada this summer. I will be there from the 18th of August until the 24th, and the exhibition runs until I think January. So this is the upcoming programs. And then, of course, writing for a PhD application, but that is going to be, I will start to do it now, of course, but I think it's going to be first part of the next year. So
awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to you for the invitation. Really appreciate it. It was really nice to talk to you, and hopefully we will see each other soon. And perhaps the next time I come to visit my brother in Lisbon.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, sure.
So bye-bye. Thank you for watching to this conversation with Davide Degano. And if you enjoy this kind of conversation, this kind of debate around photography and social issues through the lens of photography, you are very likely to also enjoy our newsletter, the Galeria Local newsletter, to which you can subscribe.